Well, Senator Alexander, I know you have been occupied on the floor, moving forward, moving through education bills and our first appropriations bills, but we miss you in the committee. Your contribution is not only important, but just a good reminder to us of the role that government should be playing as we help to facilitate this. I think one of the things that I have enjoyed as I have learned more about these advanced reactor technologies is just the whole smorgasbord that is out there. We're not talking about one approach, one technology. There's a diversity now that I think we recognize, and how we figure out how we encourage that rather than doing what we do around here, which is deciding who the winners and who the losers are going to be and hoping that we bet on the right one. So your comments about this, I think, are very important, and then the level of support that we should be providing at the federal level. I want to ask one more quick question, and then we will wrap up. I appreciate everyone giving us so much time this morning, but this is directed to you, Dr. DeWitt, because I'm very curious about the true potential for what you're describing with micro reactors and the potential in remote areas, whether it's a place like Alaska or you think about some of our islanded, our territories. I've been going back and forth a lot with the folks in Guam about what we're going to do. We've got military buildup there, but basically you're an island that's still powered by diesel. CNMI, still powered by diesel. Look at Puerto Rico and the financial mess that they are in. So much of that comes to them because they haven't been able to figure out how they deal with their energy. So I look at some of these areas as just a perfect opportunity or environment to have these smaller scaled technologies. But how you deploy them out, and let's use Alaska. Let's take an area like Bethel. So you've got about 4,000 people out there. You're not attached by road. It's expensive in the first place. How do you deploy? How do you deal with? You mentioned in response to, I believe it was Senator Cassidy, some of the issues about how you deal with the proliferation. You're sitting out there in Bethel, and I think you indicated that this is heavy, difficult stuff to move, but realistically, how could something like this work in remote, high-cost areas with small populations?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So that's exactly the market that we are targeting, is to bring power to save money in places like Bethel, where we would build probably between 2 and 4 reactors. And they work in a neat way because they're designed in a containerized fashion, such that we would ship basically 2 shipping containers nominally out per reactor that would go. So in the case of 4 reactors, we'd have 8 containers that would go up. And 4 of those containers are the reactors themselves, the reactor module. We would then bury that in a hole that we would dig, not very deep, about 20 feet deep. And then on top, we would put the other container, which contains the power converter.
We want to talk to you later about permafrost and how we deal with that. But
fair.
Yeah.
So in those situations, we can actually mound up, and it works above. So good point, though. And that actually adds a nice benefit for a couple of reasons, permafrost itself, but that's a separate conversation. But anyway, you put the reactors there, and then the process works that you can then tie up to either microgrid solution or whatever the local grid system is there. And advances in power electronics actually enable us to do even more things in terms of grid matching and harmonizing with demand curves in small communities that are islanded from other grids effectively. And we would produce power for 12 years before refueling. And these systems use low-enriched fuel, so they're not weaponizable material. They're also fairly small. I mean, you talk about fitting a shipping container. That also means there's not much fuel in there. But they're also not small enough that you can just throw it on the back of your pickup truck and drive away. They weigh 30-plus tons, and you don't have equipment left there that would be able to move them, as well as the emplacement that goes on top of them. To the point that then the reactors themselves really aren't attractive, targets to go after and try to get materials. Plus, from the intervention side and security, like Senator Cassidy mentioned and asked, we have a staff. We'll plan on having security staff and personnel on site, but it's also something we can respond to. Just like we have those plans in place for research and test reactors and other places, it's something that we can manage and definitely secure and make sure that it is not presenting a problem. And the important thing, though, is that this provides a level of energy security and reliability that these communities have never really seen before, right? They no longer have to rely on diesel. We've talked to some folks in certain communities that talk about bringing diesel in on dog sled. Those costs get super expensive very quickly. We eliminate those problems. And on top of that, it's not just electricity we can provide, it's also process heat, right? So we can heat community centers or even local, if we tied into, if the infrastructure is in place, district heating, and we could tie into that and supply for that. And the important thing is that this saves a lot of money over diesel fuel. And it opens up basically larger portions of energy to be used by those populations to help overcome a lot of the challenges that they're stuck with, which is, constrained by limited access to power. And in terms of operations, we have these things operated, the small crew, because they're cooled purely by natural forces. And we wanted to design something that's very robust, such that it doesn't require much intervention or maintenance or monitoring. So you kind of operate this thing sort of like you think of an oil rig, where you have crews going in and off, and that's basically how we provide that infrastructure and then produce power in these areas. And it gives us the opportunity to be able to put these nearly anywhere. So that's really the objective that we're trying to go after.
Has there been much, we talked a fair amount about public-private partnerships and working with the national labs, working with universities. How much has been done with Department of Defense? They obviously have a renewable, not necessarily renewable mandate, but a goal towards reduced emissions on military installations. At one point in time, the community of Galena along the Yukon River was actually looking at small nuclear as a potential for not only that community, but what at that time remained of a military installation. But is how much discussion is going on within DoD for military installations, particularly in more remote areas, whether it's Guam or whether it's Eielson Air Force Base?
We've engaged with different groups in the Department of Defense who've been interested in this. I think the big issue, so they understand generally the need profile, but I think where we are and where we need to get to is to show that this is a mature technology that works. And I don't think the DoD is necessarily the right place to, well, let me rephrase that. The way they've looked at it is not necessarily the right place to start. I think that can change as they see this going, and I think there's opportunities and partnerships between DoD and private industry, like with what we're doing, and possibly DOE, in showing that this can work. But DoD has been hesitant to, I would say, take the lead on doing these reactor technologies because I think they still perceive them to be more in the developmental stage and not quite as ready for deployment. And we're hoping to change that perception very soon.
Mr. Hopkins, do you have any comments on that aspect of it, or just
My
the applicability of the small?
My understanding,
reactors?
Senator, that in fact, the DoD are looking now at small modular reactors. I think one thing that helped us all in the administration's executive order on alternative energy last year came out and included SMRs as part of alternative energy, which could open the bandwidth for federal facilities. If you look at your state in an area of Fairbanks where you have quite a few military installations, Fort Richardson, Fort Greely, a large Air Force base, if you could work out a PPA with a local utility to provide the military installation reliable energy of which they need, not only for the military installations, but also the surrounding community where the support staff is and where these people live. And I envision that I could see applications for the micro or small modular reactors in those type of instances.
I appreciate that. Very, very interesting this morning. I appreciate the contributions of all of you, leadership in this area, which, again, I believe very, very strongly needs to be a robust part of our energy portfolio. So thank you for your contributions. And with that, we